and I think they're courageous poems as well. And I think that's important to acknowledge. I also want to thank Ekstasis Editions, who agreed to publish this book. This is a challenging document, and not everyone was willing to receive it with open arms, and Richard Olafson was, and I'm grateful that he did agree to do that. Also, a special thank you to Rhonda Gantz, who did a really wonderful copy edit on it for us. And Katrina, who's joining us from Australia, who wrote the afterword. And I'll introduce her in a few minutes, partway through the evening, and she's going to say a bit about her response to the book. I took a lot of time thinking about tonight because the poems are really intense. So I've structured it so that we've got 3 small sections with breaks in between the second and third section to give us a chance to catch our breath. I'll do a little introduction of each of the poets who are going to read. And also, if the spirit moves me, say a word or two about the poems. We're up to 46 people, and we're scattered from, Vermont, Ontario, BC, all over the place. So it's a great gathering. So once again, welcome to all those who've joined us. We're going to start the first set with a poem by Rhonda Gantz, While the World Carries On, it's called. Rhonda has many hats that she wears. Her first book of poetry, Frequent Small Loads of Laundry, was shortlisted for the 2018 Dorothy Livesay Poetry Prize and the Victoria Butler Book Prize. She's had poems in a lot of different places, including on buses and in the transit series. And she reads often at our open mic, and she also is the webmaster for Planet Earth Poetry. So Rhonda, why don't you kick us off with While the World Carries On.
Thanks, Daniel. Thank you for putting this book together. When I read the book and every single poem, I was really moved by all the different voices that were in here. And when you put the call out, I went to my suicide poems file, which I thought every poet had one sitting there with all their suicide poems in it. Thank goodness there are some poets who are a bit more cheerful. So then I wrote this poem specifically for this call because I thought about the people in my life who committed suicide and how it was their names I remembered, in the shower during the day. So I wanted to just put a different point of view to a suicide poem. While the world carries on. While the world carries on, the names of suicides float in sea foam, drift till the foam breaks on the shore, where Lena, who cannot sleep, walks her island. Her task to gather and speak the names, her work unending. The names float in on the beach, where Lena, who knows your grief, gathers in her palms the names and the sadness. Her island with Prometheus moths who have no mouth and do not eat. Her island with moths, but no bed for Lena, who does not sleep. The names, they drift in spheres of light, break when she speaks, spill radiant, bright, and her pale shore gleams, and Lena begs pardon for stumbling on Urdu, Icelandic, Aymara, Inuktitut, sounding out Farsi and Kazakh, Cantonese, Dundari, the names as strong as every house's word for death. And when Lena says a suicide's name, someone who loved them, stopped at a red light or texting a friend or closing a door, resetting passwords or catching a bus, hanging out clothes, someone who loved them in a small dark room says the name of their suicide too. And a moth with no mouth steadies its wings as Lena bends to the next wave as it rolls, as this day's names roll in. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks ever so much, Rhonda. I didn't say that's the first poem in the book, and I wanted that. As soon as I read it, I thought this is how the book is going to begin, because it takes the whole topic to around the world all at once. So special thanks to you for that, Rhonda. Our next poem is by Wendy Donawa. He seldom comes to my dreams. This is one of many poems in the book written in memory of a family member. Wendy was originally from Victoria, spent several decades, Wendy, 3 decades, 2 decades, 3 decades, I think, living in Barbados as a college instructor and a museum curator. And since returning to the coast, where she did a doctoral degree, she's written, her work has appeared in anthologies, literary magazines, and in solo chapbooks, and her debut collection, Thin Air of the Knowable, a wonderful book, was shortlisted for the Gerald Lampard Award. So over to you, Wendy, for your lovely poem.
Thank you, Daniel. It's an honor to be in this collection and to be in the company of so many fine poets. And I want to say that I am grateful to be living on the traditional territory of the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. He comes seldom to my dreams. I'm ready to start college, 5 years younger than Mike, 5 older than kid brother. But Mike left in his old jalopy weeks ago, out of work again, off to see the world and raise hell. He'd sent for the Charles Atlas bodybuilding program so girls would like him and bullies won't throw sand in his face. Postcards from Pouce Coupé, Grand Forks, a few American towns drifting south, then silence. I'm upstairs listening to Red Robinson spinning the top 10 and swirling my new felt circle skirt in the mirror when the doorbell rings. A police car in the drive. Adult voices downstairs, discordant with distress. The police regret to inform. Next day, I take police calls from Missouri. I've never heard a Southern accent, found them only in American comedies. Young man found by the river, his handgun nearby. They need dental records for identification. My father moans in the living room. My mother weeps quietly all day. Kid brother leans sobbing against the bathtub. All this half a century ago, but sometimes I see a scrawny, straggling, swaggering kid and long to fold him in my arms. My sons are older now than Mike will ever be. He comes seldom to my dreams, but when he does, he's in the zoot suit of my faded photos, slouched, glancing sideways. Hey kiddo, he says. That made them pay attention. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. Lovely poem. Part of the reason I asked Wendy to read that poem is that she read it one night at the open mic when this project was just starting to become a possibility. And I immediately felt like there are poems worth hearing about this topic and they are worth gathering together. So Wendy, thanks for that inspirational moment. You are one of the seeds of this project, though you didn't know that until this moment. Thanks ever so much. I want to just make sure that everyone who isn't reading is on mute, because otherwise we get an echo because your system then feeds the sound back into the system. So make sure you put yourself on mute. And Leanne, you can mute people if you see someone who isn't muted. Thanks very much. Our next reader is Barbara Herringer. I want to welcome her. She's a Victoria poet whose work has appeared in journals, chapbooks, and anthologies. She's a former editor, social worker, and academic. I knew Barbara when she was at Camosun quite a few years ago now. Let's not talk about how long ago that was. And she says in her bio, 2 of her 4 brothers have taken their own lives. And this is an incredibly powerful poem that she's about to read called Incantation, the Morning He Jumped. Barbara, please, and thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. And thanks to all the poets tonight. This feels like a lovely acknowledgement of what a lot of us have been through. I'm going to read Incantation, the Morning He Jumped. And it is about my brother Jay, who died of, well, obviously suicide, but during the AIDS crisis in Vancouver in the late 80s. Incantation, the Morning He Jumped. We are weeping and falling and weeping and falling. The sadness is soaking, the sadness, your body. Your body is falling, the angels keep weeping. Your body now splintered, your bones now a puzzle. Your mother is moaning, the April sky panting, the weeping, the falling, the sadness still soaking your body. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Thanks very much. I find that poem especially powerful. Barbara has another equally powerful poem in the book. So you'll come across her voice again in other readings. One of the things that I became aware of in putting this book together and reading poems is how long some of these experiences linger in people's lives. And our next poet, Dorothy Field, is going to read a poem that called After My Friend's Husband Drove Himself Off a Cliff. She's the author of 3 books of poetry, most recently Blackbird Must Be. Lots of single poems in journals across the country. She's also a visual artist these days, making print-based work on handmade paper. Born in New York, she lives in Victoria in an old house surrounded by fruit trees, berry bushes, and a small forest of native plants. And it is a magical place to visit if you ever get a chance. So let's welcome Dorothy Field. Dorothy.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes, okay. I have to apologize for not being seen when I signed into the Zoom. You could see me, but then I wanted to be heard and I couldn't be heard. And when I got myself heard, then my face disappeared. So I'm not a Zoom expert. Anyway, thank you, Daniel. Thank you, everybody. It's a wonderful book. I just realized that it's 45 years ago that this suicide happened, and it's still hard. After my friend's husband drove himself off a cliff, we attend a workshop for those who've lost someone to suicide. I thought I'd fill the 10-year hollow Susan left when she swallowed pills, but freshets of grief roar through me as if it was only last Sunday or maybe Monday. No anger, only grief that she couldn't find a way to stay. Susan, who breathed fireflies into midnight skies, blew soap bubble stories. Susan, wife of my madman brother David, his wild, frantic energy, who told her, get well or else. Susan, who never voiced her darker pools. I'd been there myself, made plans, drive my car into the woods, walk back to the studio, climb the loft ladder, down pills, heap myself in quilts. I came back down, never spoke of that moonless day, grateful I'd met gravity's pull to Earth's pumping heart, my curiosity stronger than my gloom. Oh, Susan, my sometime sister, in the unsolace of your chill Vermont house, snow to the windowsills, your cityness in the stark white expanse. Still I mourn your serpentine smile, your bright strawberry hair. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. Lovely, lovely poem. How the losses linger, eh? Okay, a couple more poems and then we'll take a pause. Our next reader is Marlene Grandmetre, who's just had a book released. She's had her poems in lots of different literary magazines, the Malahat Review, Grain, Antagonish Review. Her work has appeared in anthologies as well. She's won prizes including Free Fall's 2013 Poetry Competition and the Federation of BC Writers 2015 Poetry Prize. She lives in Victoria, actually in Esquimalt. And she's reading a poem called A Drowning Pool. And this is a really different take, part of the reason I included it this evening. So Marlene, over to you for A Drowning Pool.
Mute myself. I've been immersed in this anthology for the last week and been very, very moved by the work in it. A drowning pool. Still in her ear, the hook, the beloved earring gone, hammered silver sea goddess, all curve and flow, a lure, a lament, metallic on the tongue, calling up her dead, and the missing years she mourns, carries as a marrow deep ache. Her mind a lake that laps at the edge of memory, then crashes and storms against a father dead too young, against paths lost from the map of her life, the family story, a drowning pool for dreams, against a child not conceived, against the trap of cancer cells, glistening river of dark jewels, sharp-edged enough to sever the thread of breath. Entangled in the nets of loss, her memories roil. She is hollowed out by absence. In the depths, regret is a knife too dull to slice the cords that bind her. Hesitant to risk love's flood, grief knot in her mouth, she yields to ocean undertow, an offer of release. Thank you.
Thanks, Marlene. So many ways to think about the pull and the draw that is so powerful for some people. A lovely poem. We're going to finish this first section with a poem by Devorah Levin. The MAID did it, M-A-I-D capitals, which stands for Medical Assistance in Dying. So this is one of the new issues that's on our plates now around this question of what Bishir, another poet in the book, calls self-murder. As always, Devorah has a touch of tongue-in-cheek when she writes a poem. And so we'll hear from her in a second. She was once a director of social change projects in Victoria and Israel. She has published numerous collections of poetry, some of them focusing around her struggle with health issues to bite the blue apple, particularly that one. She's fascinated by physics and the connection between physics and everything else. She's edited 2 poetry collections written by the homeless sex workers and addicts in recovery, Voices from the Edge and Victoria on the Banks of the Mainstream. And she continues, before we fell into COVID times, to lead poetry writing sessions with federal parolees in a halfway house. Can't do that now, can you? Anyhow, let's welcome Devorah Levin. The MAID did it.
Thank you, Daniel. I want to congratulate you and the other poets on being brave enough to contribute to this series. And I went to a conference at University of Victoria on medical assistance in dying after its first year, and I have quite mixed feelings about it, but I decided it would be an interesting addition to the idea of suicide. The maid did it. This death carefully vacuumed clean, syringes sterilized, polished to a shine, when reasonably foreseeable death sacrificed its gift of surprise to arrive by consent of both guests and management to medical assistance in dying. The maid's cart contains burdens and blessings, so many conversations, forms to fill in, witnesses, excluding family, bequest recipients, details meticulously planned, statistics kept, decisions confirmed, reconfirmed, and once again, just before the end. Wrapped in legal red tape, medicos vacate their pledge to the angels, to bow down to legalized release from end of life suffering. While such suicides are expertly scrubbed clean, nothing changes the prolonged aftermath. Survivor loved ones crumpled with tranquilized pain, along with the blessings and burdens of having yet one more way to enter our post-mortal lives.
Thanks, Devorah. You see, there are other ways to think about things. We're going to take a bit of a break now, and just to pause to catch our breaths and reflect on things. I want to, though, in this space, introduce you to Katrina Jaworski, who has written the very dense afterword that's in the back of the book. Katrina, I've been working with Katrina for about 8 or 9 years off and on now, I think it is. We first met at a conference on madness that was at Oxford. And then the second year, I had had a long conversation with a friend from another academic network whose son had just committed suicide. And I was sitting beside Katrina and wrote a poem based on this woman's story. It's in one of my earlier books called Unfathomable. And she sort of leaned over and asked to read the poem. And then she slid it back to me and said, we're going to write papers about this. And that has led me into this whole world of writing poems about suicide, and Katrina taking time to reflect on them. And at our conference, we did a paper in Canterbury in England a few years back. The idea came up that there was supposed to be a conference this past year or in June of this year in Vancouver. And of course it got canceled. And they said maybe I could get some poets together who would read poems they'd written about suicide. And that for me was the spark to say, well, if we're going to do that, why don't I put out a call for poems? And so the book came to be once Richard agreed to publish it. And I felt very strongly that Katrina's voice needed to be included and the academic reflections needed to be included. And she is the first reader of the full book, since I sent her a draft of it so that she could write the afterword. So Katrina, maybe you'd say a few things about your responses and the book.
Thanks, Daniel, for your kind words. I can't believe I did that to you at the conference. I have a lot of gumption most of the time. I want to begin, thank you. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here today, but I actually want to begin by acknowledging that I meet with you from the lands of the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians of the area in which I live, and the lands that were never ceded, like in the case of Canada. And I want to pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. And as someone who writes and researches suicide, genocide, the philosophy of dying bodies, I'm always reminded just how important it is to acknowledge those that came before me and still shape my thinking. Again, thank you, Daniel, for inviting me here today. It's really great to be here. You know, I'm tearing up, but at times, but at the same time, I wouldn't have it in any other way. I've had the voices of over 90 poems occupy my headspace for quite some time, so it's really good to see some of the poets and actually hear your voices. It's to make it, I guess, more real. But yes, I was the first one to read it all, and it took me a while to kind of work through it because there's so much to offer. I'm going to just read a little bit out of the afterword I wrote, because it kind of captures what I want to say. The poems in this anthology offer us a way to understand suicide as something beyond the rigid distinction between moral and immoral, beyond the clinical labels of mental illness and bereavement, and beyond representations of suicide in popular culture. In many ways, the anthology offers us an insightful commentary on the way society responds to suicide via individual actions and institutions responsible for dealing with the aftermath. The poems represent what people want to express about suicide, be it from the perspective of suicidal survivor or grieving survivors, but perhaps could not or chose not to, because anything about voicing suicide requires the kind of listening beyond clinical spaces, religious institutions, and funeral parlors. The poems represent what happens when people have to face that which is so utterly overwhelming, a trauma for which there are not enough words despite the extensive knowledge about trauma through diagnostic texts, research monographs, and countless self-help books. I remain deeply moved by the beauty of this anthology embodied in every single poem. This beauty is not aesthetic in the traditional sense, nor is it about the technical skills exercised by the poets. Instead, it is about the unfiltered and unapologetic honesty, courage, anguish, and the audacity to keep company with pain, heartache, anger, rage, love, sadness, and the viscerality of grief. And so I thank Daniel again for inviting me and being part of this launch. As a social philosopher and researcher who's published on suicide for over 20 years, I have learned a lot by working with Daniel. Our conversations, co-thinking and writing over the years have taught me much about the power of poetry when it comes to understanding something as complex as suicide. I think poetry is a perfect medium for understanding suicide because it allows us to voice things which are very hard to describe. So much about suicide is beyond words or stuck between words. This might be because the act of suiciding often happens in private with no one there to witness it. Something about suicide is indescribable also because of the waves of shock, disbelief, and feeling of utter numbness that settle on us when we first hear of someone's death. Can poetry offer hope? Yes, because it can be part of the process of getting a grip on loss, but also because it generates compassion and a space through which some of us may get a chance to learn how to live side by side with what is indescribable, learning to live again, learning to live differently. Thank you.
Thanks, Katrina. I'm always astonished by the depth of Katrina's thinking and the way she puts things together. So we will actually take about a 5-minute break. So we'll start up again about 7:35. So feel free to chat with one another, or if anyone wants to make a comment to a poet, the space is open now for a few minutes. Feel free to unmute yourselves and chat if you want.
Well, I've had to deal with suicide quite a lot. I actually didn't even hear about this poetry thing till recently, and have had to call the police a number of times when people wouldn't be admitted to hospital. But interestingly, I've always thought that it was good to have the option of committing suicide if you became really ill or hopeless feeling, but it really hurts other people.
I think this is why we needed an anthology about it, because it's a really hard thing to talk about. Nobody's talking about it. So I know poetry was a way for me when I was in therapy to be able to say things that I couldn't say otherwise. And I was with somebody who was very open to that process. And so I think poetry is an entry point for these discussions. And I'm grateful that it's been collected together. And I'm fascinated to read Katrina's words on it. And, you know, I'd like to find some more of your academic writings, because I'm really interested in your professional work of the past couple of decades on this topic. I think being a suicidologist is a rare and wonderful thing. And I think what you're doing is really important. And yeah, I'm going to see if I can find some more resources from you. Thank you, Katrina.
Thank you, Rhonda. I'm happy to chat with you more, and if you want to read specifically some stuff, but as much as I actually know, or supposed to be an expert, you know, I only know this much or even less. In my world of academia, we're supposed to be experts, but the more I know, the more I know, I realize that I don't know much, or the less I know, in a way. It's really interesting, actually, in terms of, I've met someone else who's used poetry in therapy, about their suicidality and the way that it worked really well to kind of, for the person who couldn't express things, poetry became this way of languaging the really difficult stuff. And the therapist was kind of really flexible, and so, you know, and was able to actually recognize that there is a creative process that actually helps to express something. So, and I'm actually really interested in doing a piece of research to actually work out, you know, how does this work? What happens in that space where people bring poems, and how does it help them to, you know, to live with the really difficult stuff, because it's not going to go away, but somehow we have to kind of work out how to live side by side with the gaps or the holes in our life. But, you know, and, you know, I say this from perspective, you know, I have written things in therapy as well. I mean, you know, just about every single academic has a psychoanalyst. I'm one of them. So, you know, it's a really powerful way to actually bring one's writing and engage in that kind of space. So yeah, thank you, Rhonda.
I've dealt with suicide a lot in my work because I've been a psychiatrist for many years.
All right. Oh wow.
But I'm retired now.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone, it's just about time to kick up again. I just want to ask if Jamie Dopp has shown up on one of the telephone lines, because they don't give names. Are you here, Jamie? Nope. Okay, well, so let's start back into the next. Is everyone doing okay? Let me just check. Are we all managing all of this? I wondered if I should have advised people to bring tissues, you know, to the event, but I didn't. Okay, our next reader is Elizabeth Adelman. And Elizabeth is a singer, a published writer, and she's currently working on a master's in writing through a college in the States. She combines her writing practice with Zen studies. She works with children in early literacy. And she's becoming quite a good writer. So let's hear your poem, Elizabeth, which is entitled The Produce Aisle.
Thank you so much. It's really a very big privilege and honor to be with everybody in community. And thank you to everyone who made it possible, which is everyone. So thanks. The produce aisle. Silence cloaked in watermelon shadows. My brother just killed himself. Why am I here? How and did I get away? Save on foods, brushing my teeth, a cadence like hothouse tomatoes in winter. Thank you.
Elizabeth, can you read it again? Because it's short and there's so much in it.
The produce aisle. Silence cloaked in watermelon shadows. My brother just killed himself. Why am I here? How and did I get away? Save on foods, brushing my teeth, a cadence like hothouse tomatoes in winter.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Okay, our next reader doesn't appear to be here, so we're going to have one less poem. And I tried sending a message to you, Stephen. Did you get it? I'm wondering if you have access to your poem survival kit without a whole lot of difficulty.
Oh, probably. Do you want me to do that now, or?
Yeah, if you can pull it up now, that would be great to hear it instead of Jamie's poem. And while he's finding it, I'll tell you a bit about Stephen. Stephen was raised on the prairies and tutored by the West Coast. His prose and poetry have seen life in stage performances and appeared in such publications as Prairie Fire, Orion, Earthshine, Gees, and so on. His first chapbook, There Are No Small Moments, was published by The Rasp and the Wine. His newest book of poetry, Bacon, Blues, and Holy Ghosts, was out in 2019. And for more of his work, you could visit his site, growmercy.org. Are you ready to read, Stephen?
Yeah. So this is just called Survival Kit. 1 year after my father-in-law took his life, his 4 children go through his garage. Rite of touching, weighing, handling, holding, a repository of memory. Clothes and collections have been laid out on tables. Garden and yard appliances line the walls. Beneath a 4x8 foot pegboard, keeping aloft his many tools, aligned and still in their pointed places, is a red duffel bag. On one side, in black felt tip permanent marker, is written, Survival Kit. A kit he took with him when he went flying his Cessna. Inside, orange pup tent, space blanket, poncho, toque, gloves, wool socks, mosquito net, toilet paper, snare wire, rope, fishing line with 2 lures, multi-tool knife, folding saw, duct tape, sewing kit, safety pins, razor blades, 2 packets of Kool-Aid, plastic cup, aluminum pot, splint with compression pad, gauze, sling, bandages, flashlight with spare battery, waterproof matches, 4 flares, a compass, a single candle. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Stephen.
Thank you.
I really like that poem, the contrast between the care for survival and taking one's own life. Thanks. Our next reader will be Anastasia Organ. Originally from Calgary, she's been living in Vancouver Island for the past decade. Her poetry is inspired by the grounding presence of Canada's forests and wildlife. She works with the local health authority. For a while, she was Planet Earth Poetry's treasurer, and a very good one at that. She's back at school again and working. Because she's worked for the local health authority, she's very aware of and has been witness to the stigma around mental illness firsthand. Her hope is to help people find acceptance, understanding, and even moments of joy among their daily struggles. And she's going to be reading us this lovely poem, Fallen Nirvana. Anastasia.
Thanks, Daniel. So first, I'll just acknowledge that I'm living and writing from the traditional territory of the Esquimalt Nation. And second, I just want to say that I'm really honored to be a part of this anthology. It's given kind of this strange sense of an unfortunate community, really just seeing how many people have been personally impacted by suicide. It's a very powerful book. The bleeding tasted of green copper. I felt it. I held my breath again. I fell. I had cut my pain upon my skin, slashed my fallen fears to touch nirvana. I thought alone my pulse would slow the stream, but it pumped for 3 minutes. I felt it stutter as it stopped, arteries thumping hollow now. Desperation fading to a solemn price, the gray of the matter lay bare. A canvas of chaos, a snapshot of despair.
Thanks, Anastasia.
Thank you.
I've read many of these poems many times, and hearing them aloud is quite something else, and it's really moving me. So I'm delighted to introduce our next reader, Laura Paul, faculty member of Michigan State University, living in Lansing, Michigan, where Donald Trump visited today, just for your information. She's the author of quite a number of collections of poetry, including Falling into Grace, Crossing the Ladder of the Sun, Requiem, Rwanda, and not so long ago, Nothing But the Blood. She's now the poet laureate in that area that she lives in, and she has been working. Has it come out, Lullaby? I don't think so. Has it come out?
No, in fact, it's, can you hear me, Daniel?
Yep.
You can hear me? It's actually retitled A Fine Yellow Dust, and it will come out next year.
Okay, great. So Laura is going to read to us a poem called Too Late. Laura.
So I'm coming to you from Michigan, as Daniel said, from the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Three Fire Confederacy of the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi people. And I'd like to echo what others have said about what an honor it is to be part of this event and this book. But I'd also like to add that, of course, I wish I weren't part of it. And thank you, Daniel, for the courage to put this all together and to bring us together. My poem is about my daughter, Hannah, who took her own life in 2017. And during part of the year that followed, I spent a few months in Victoria, which is where I met Daniel and so many of the poets here. Hannah died in Saginaw, Michigan, which is the birthplace and the childhood home of the US poet Theodore Retke. And in this poem, I weave Retke's own poems and his own words into the poem, so you'll hear his voice as well as mine. The poem is Too Late. Theodore Retke, she lives in your town. She's going to die there. Stop her. Find the words to unlock the duplex door. Say to her, oh, my sister, remember the stars, the tears, the trains. Tell her, out of these nothings, all beginnings come. Remind her, a lovely, understandable spirit once entertained you. It will come again. Be still, wait. Take her small hand.
Laura, could you read it again?
I can.
Thank you.
Too late. Theodore Retke, she lives in your town. She's going to die there. Stop her. Find the words to unlock the duplex door. Say to her, oh, my sister, remember the stars, the tears, the trains. Tell her, out of these nothings, all beginnings come. Remind her, a lovely, understandable spirit once entertained you. It will come again. Be still, wait. Take her small hand.
Thanks ever so much, Laura. It's a lovely poem. Okay, our last poem in this middle section will be read by Barbara Black from a local resident here. Musician, fiction writer, flash fiction writer, and poetry writer. She's been published in Canadian and international magazines, the Cincinnati Review, the New Quarterly, CV2, Prairie Fire. She was nominated for the 2019 Writers Trust McClellan and Stewart Journey Prize and won the 2019 Geist Annual Literal Literacy Postcard Story. That's a handful of a title. In 2018, her work was longlisted for the Commonwealth Short Story Prize, and in 2017 won first prize in the Writers' Union of Canada Short Prose Competition. A woman of many interests and talents, and I'm delighted to have you joining us tonight, Barbara. So she's going to read Fado 5. You can maybe tell everyone what a fado is, since they might not know, Barbara.
Okay. A fado is a form of Portuguese song. Some call it the Portuguese blues, but it's not quite the same style as blues, but it's about sorrow and nostalgia, sadness. It's really beautiful music. It's all heart and all emotion, and I really love it. And so this poem is from a series of poems I wrote based on fado lyrics. And this one starts with a quotation that's from, you might have heard of Cristina Branco. She's a Portuguese fado singer. And these are her own lyrics. And I'll just read you the English, not the Portuguese translation. Lisboa, you are the one I send the soul of my fado to, towards the alleys of your body. Fado 5. All things contain their future. Once fulfilled, they depart. Inside me, an old song has rewritten itself. Once I heard your body's notes, hid them in my violet wings. Together, we lived on the thin light of dusk. But night came on with its hungry mouth. You left, tongue torn like a scarlet petal. Come to my garden. Come back to me. Let the nightingale embrace your silence. Live secretly inside my breast. Oh, your eyes have become roses, your hands the thorns.
Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you.
Okay, I have scheduled us for another break now, and I think it's probably a good time to just catch our breath yet again after so many strong feelings. I really would encourage you to talk to one another a little bit in this break, and I'll call you together when it gets really quiet. But there's lots to say to one another, and don't be afraid. If you want to just chat with one person, you can use the chat function down on the side if you just want to send a comment to someone privately. So anyhow, carry on.
Daniel, congratulations. It's a wonderful, wonderful collection.
Yeah, congratulate the poets.
The poets, of course.
Yeah.
For you putting it together. And by the way, all those years of looking after us too, you were really great.
Daniel, I'm just thinking about the title of the anthology. I don't know if there's anything more you want to say about it, but it just in the last moment struck me as so very, very beautifully appropriate, the voicing, because there's just so much to give voice to in this around this experience that's, you know, speaking to and speaking for, and so many things so many tender and difficult things to say. So I just wondered if you'd say a bit more about that.
Yeah, when I was doing my work with young adolescents, which was part of my sort of academic career, I was very interested in the whole issue of coming to voice and how adolescents are and young adults are trying to find their own voice. And so voice, it has that multiple meaning for me around also claiming. I also was very aware from the conversations I heard at the conferences, the critical suicidology conferences that I attended, of the business of stigma and silence that haunts this particular place in the world. I mean, most people aren't aware of it, but until very recently, even in Canada, suicide was considered a criminal offense. So it meant there was a phenomenal amount of shame and suppression around in every family if someone attempted suicide, because you were trying to hide a criminal offense. So I think it's, I mean, for me, the simplicity of the title, Voicing Suicide, was all of those things, just giving voice, breaking the silence, allowing people to articulate how close this comes in so many lives. And frankly, I think we need the conversations. And I think the poems, as Katrina has said a couple of times, open the space up completely differently for those conversations. So there's a kind of magic in poetry, the way it speaks to things.
Oh yeah, and creates empathy and compassion, even if it hasn't come close to someone so directly. You know, it just opens the heart to those who have had that experience. Yeah, absolutely.
Funny for me. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can, John.
I joined this Zoom call because of you, Daniel, and that we were, you know, we had other connections from the past, and completely forgot that I was hospitalized after I had cancer, threatening suicide. And then quite a bit later, when I had 2 young kids and was going to school and working at the same time, again, I actually got started killing myself. And by some miracle, I phoned my wife of 50 years at that time and made connection, and we started crying, and here I am, you know, much further on and in a wonderful life with those kids now grown and so creative and lovely, and my life has turned out well. You know, I feel blessed. And I was 37 at the time, and I'm 75 now. Imagine.
Double.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks, John.
She apologized to you, meaning a public apology?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I wanted to tell you a story about the medical assistants in dying. This small conference we had, they had a nurse give statistics, and then they had a man who was in his 40s who talked about being there when his mom decided to have this form of death. And she wanted a hamburger and Tim Horton coffee before as her last meal, which was a kind of basic requirement. When she had the Tim Horton coffee, she opened the lid, and inside it said, "You've just won a free coffee." And she got very excited, and then she said, "Oh," and she started to laugh. She said, "I won't be here." And her joy in finishing her life in that way and having this giggle made the family start to giggle. And this was a passing that they really, really enjoyed. But what they didn't do was plan what happens next. And after she did die, they were just, he said, they were bereft in a strange way, because they went from giggling to actually the reality. So that roller coaster, even when it's planned, and it was such an interesting story to hear about the roller coaster. When you think it's all controlled and carefully managed, it's never like that, really.
Thanks, Devorah. Okay, are we ready for our last round of, oh, Nina, you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm actually, I lost my brother to suicide in '95. I'm also a psychologist, and I run survivor groups. And I was going to say, I really appreciate this because we have, in one of our group sessions, we have writing exercises. And basically we just give people prompts and just, a few minutes to write on each prompt. And what emerges is so profound and so powerful. And often people will say, I didn't even know I had that within me. And so as a result of that, a lot of them have kept up with the writing, and that they continue to share that with each other. So I am definitely going to recommend this book to all of the survivors that I encounter. So thank you.
Oh, that's good news. Thanks very much, Nina. Okay, we've been going an hour, and I'd like to have time at the end for people to chat again if they wanted. So let's start the third set. This first poem is by Karen Chester. Karen says about her work, these days my work is often also my play. The stories I hear become grist for the mill. Having spent time both in the worlds of fertility, infertility, and more recently in palliative care, it seems to me that things generally have a way of circling around. Usually I never get to hear the end of the story. Karen's poetry has appeared on CBC Radio and in a number of anthologies edited by Patrick Lane. A thoughtful, careful, and interesting woman, Karen Chester. You write under Karen Chester, is that still true? Or yeah, but she's actually a Laux, and it's been an interesting thing because I grew up in a village that had a bunch of Laux families, and so they must all be related to her because it's an unusual name. Anyhow, Karen, your turn. Let's hear from your poem, Last Session.
Thanks for the warm welcome, Daniel, and just feel very grateful to be amongst all of you tonight. I'm very aware that in my work as a bereavement counselor that poetry serves me very well, and I hope my clients. We begin a journaling group through grief on Friday night online. I imagine this book will find its way to us that night and in the future nights. And I was in a poetry workshop today with Carla Funk, and there's this one line I just wanted to say stood out. One of her prompts to us was, things I will need in the past. So this writing world just weaves itself so beautifully for me in my working world. This poem is from my working world. Last Session. It begins with an epigraph by Dylan Thomas. Curse, bless me now. Dylan Thomas, do not go gentle into that good night. I'd like to lend you a book, I say. Him, I cannot borrow it. I wrap the book in brown craft paper, kitchen string. I've decided if I mail it, perhaps he will write, say one more thing. I cannot go as he, his brave withholding, his eggshell thin protection of me. No amount of acting can mask his sorrow. For 23 years, she was his row B, seat 4, And so he has decided no more Adolf, Vladimir, no more painted bird. Is not so gentle going curses me now. Bless how fierce my tears, and on the sill, white gerberas, I cannot look. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Our next poem is by Beth Cope called Means Restriction. Beth lives here in Victoria on the traditional Lekwungen People's Territory and the Sanish People's Territory. She's the author of Falling Season and Average Height of Flight. And her third book, Atlas of Roots, is due in spring next year with Caitlin Press. She's also been involved with Yvonne Blomer in poems in the forest and the poet tree event over the last couple of years at the Victoria Festival of Authors. And also she's been part of the Vancouver Poetry in Transit and Poetry Hidden in Pockets project. So lots of poems scattered about the world from Beth Cope. So Beth, over to you for Means Restriction.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Daniel, for pulling us all together and for everybody's words. Means restriction, wherein reducing access to any lethal means of suicide decreases the suicide rate. 1. Sylvia, poster girl for this move, knees on green, cold tile, facing her execution chamber. How stoves waited for despair in anyone's kitchen until gas conversion. 2. When he couldn't reach the east side of the bridge where he planned to jump, because the barricades for the traffic meant he could be hit by a car on the way there, his plan folded. 3. My father walked in the front door, dark winter evening, heavy as his wool overcoat, settled with a sigh on the stairs, removed black overshoes, the kind you never see now. How do we spell depression? He'd thrown his pills into the front yard. Black dog ran for them, panting. I'm sent to gather them up. 4. It was late October when she removed her clothes and jumped from the Nanaimo-bound ferry. She didn't expect to live. Then came white spotlights, cormorant helicopters, Coast Guard boats. The orange lifesaver rescue flotation ring floated closer. She is no longer terminal. The ocean shore is where she should be now. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Beth. I love that the poets have found so many ways to think about this. The next poem that we're going to hear is by Lauren Carter, who couldn't be with us tonight at the last minute, and Leanne is going to read her poem called Blackbirds. Lauren's poetry has won first place in the Room Magazine's annual Poetry Prize. She's been long-listed for the Relit Award and twice long-listed in the CBC Poetry Prize. Her first collection, Like and Bright, was called a stunning debut by the Canadian Book Review annual, and her debut novel, Swarm, appeared in the CBC's list of top 40 books that could change Canada. Her publications are in The World Following Sea, Swarm, a novel, Like and Bright, which is poetry, and This Has Nothing to Do with You, as out a novel that's out more recently. She lives in Winnipeg, and she and I have been chatting about trying to organize an online reading there, which some of you will get it. Well, we'll send the invitation to everyone, and we'll probably be asking people to read. So Leanne, would you, oh, let me just say one other thing. There's another poem in the book by Tim Carter, who completed suicide, and Lauren submitted his poem and this poem as an accompanying poem to give it context. Leanne, thanks for reading this.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Okay, so Blackbirds 1. Snow comes like coal, dust across the sky, a blur hiding the morning, red winged blackbirds silent in the socked-in marsh, like homeless bachelors, huddled to stay warm, down puffed around them. In the rooming house, we found your disguises, heaps of clothing piled on the bed, camouflage and black hoodies, burgundy shirts, the dark colors you preferred, helped you blend with the night. 2. In the marsh, the males are alone, claiming territory, lighting the sky with crystalline trills like we tried to do. 3 females to 1 male surrounding you, battling the black when it flew too close, crowding in. 3. We thought you were safe, kept in the cage, needed to hold you, but you weren't. You left with fire in your fingers, the trick of a cigarette, that last ember flaring like the puff of an epaulette as you leapt into flight.
Thanks, Leanne. A lovely poem of embrace, that one. Our next reader is John Barton, who's currently the Poet Laureate of Victoria. Multiple published books. And John, I'm just realizing that the bio that I have from you doesn't have the title of your latest book, which I'm trying to dig out of my memory, and it's too full tonight. You want to just shout it out so people know what it is?
A Lost Family, a Memoir.
A Lost Family, a Memoir, right. And John will actually be reading from that book at Planet Earth Poetry in November. What do you got, 12 books of poetry now, John, and 9 chapbooks. Very prolific author. Over the last few years, John has been writing sonnets, many of them. What's the count now? Do you know?
Over 375. 375.
Yeah, 375. Just just think 14 lines, 375 times. If that doesn't astonish you, nothing will. Anyhow, John's poem is called Pop Music Stigmata, and I'm going to invite John to read it now. Go ahead, John.
Okay. Sorry, just flipped my computer. So page 36. All right, I'm not going to say anything about the poem. Pop music stigmata. First, I tried gulping 50 vitamins, capsules pellet shaped, by gravity primed to pop down my throat, hugging to the rhymed prospect of happy death. I foresaw, twinned with existential half thought out practice, 1 a days repurposed to telescope into a placebo toxin I hope vaccinates doubt with courage, quick acting, not time released as I lie down for real, absorption too slow to stop me thinking, dosed and prone on this unmade dorm room bed, mouthing scratchy lyrics, my hi-fi nails through me, needles skipping as I lip sync, alive, but that's the last thing on my mind. And the last line is from a song by the 70s pop singer Melanie.
Thanks ever so much, John. Ever so much. The last poem of the evening is called The Length of Morning, and written by Rayanne Haynes, who's coming to us from Alberta. She has been the executive director of the Edmonton Poetry Festival. I don't know if that's still the case. Is that still the case, Rayanne?
No, I'm retired from that job now.
Wise woman, she's moved on. Her novel in verse, Stained with the Colors of Sunday Morning, was launched to critical reviews. She's been a feature artist for the Capital City Press with the Edmonton Public Library. She was shortlisted for the Edmonton Poet Laureate. She was named a writer in residence for Edmonton's independent bookstore, Audrey's, in 2019. Her video poem, I'm Here to Use My Voice, has has over 6,000 views on YouTube. And she's been published in anthologies, online and in magazines. And she's also co-host of Let's Get Lit, a drunk poetry podcast. Some of these bios are a little out of date. They were written, some of them almost 2 years ago. So sorry if they're not up to date, but I wanted Rianne's poem to be last, partly because of the title, The Length of Morning, which is something many of us have discovered in this process, that it does go on. So Rianne, please bring us to an end here tonight.
Thank you, Daniel. I am coming to you from Amiskwaciwâskahikan, Treaty 6, Edmonton, Alberta. And I want to thank you, Daniel, very much for putting this anthology together. And to all the poets that read tonight and to all the poets that are in the book. I was reading it the last couple of days and it's incredibly moving. My story is a little different. My son did survive. So, The Length of Morning. November 2017. In November, he planned to kill himself, though without plan. Cold seeping, river frost, through truck window, to his fingers, as they gripped the phone, gripped the steering wheel, until his knuckles cracked. July 2018. In July, the good-meaning people ask if you've seen a counselor. You drink rum by the ocean instead. Wine gives you a headache, like talking to people. Also, you swam a lot instead of having sex. Also, you let your hair gray, stopped shaving. Also, you cried every day because anything else hurt too much. August 2018. In August, the lesion appeared on your breast. You remember being confused because it wasn't a lump. You remember your throat closing. Later that week, someone mentioned the phenomenal year you've had. Like so many others congratulated your phenomenal year. And your body recoiled. My son wanted to kill himself. For months, you laid in his bed, curled around him like a crow, praying to a God you don't even believe in to heal him. Thank you.
Thanks, Rianne.
Thank you.
So deeply for me, to all of you who've written and been included in this book, and to those of you who I couldn't get into the book, my appreciation is beyond words, really. I'm so moved by so much of this and the gift that these poems are going to offer people as they have been here tonight, heard aloud for the first time together. An astonishing experience. I deeply want to thank everyone for being here tonight. For those of you who read, for those of you who are in the book who didn't get to read yet and will get a chance in one of the other readings in January in Vancouver, in Winnipeg, whenever it happens, the one that I'm trying to work on in Toronto. So if you want to organize a reading somewhere in the world, let me know and we'll get the poets together and hear from them. So thanks everyone for being here. We'll leave the room open for a while. We can probably stop the recording now, Leanne.